You're listening to My Evolved Life, a podcast that simplifies health and fitness and helps you maximize your life. My name is Vuna Win, and I'm the creator of the Evolution Training System. We're so lucky to be living in the information age, meaning it's easier than ever to access information and find answers to any questions you may have. But isn't it confusing when you read information that's conflicting, or worse yet, just sounds wrong? I'll be sitting down with industry professionals to give you clarity and leave you with tangible actions you can take immediately to improve your physical, mental, and psychological health. On today's episode, I had Shawna Curry, a registered nurse and health expert, and we got into the topic of sleep. We talked about how sleep is the foundation of health, how to build good sleep habits, and the importance of having good sleep routines. I promise, this one will not put you to sleep. Today's guest is Shawna Curry. Shawna is an Amazon best-selling author and international speaker. Her writings have been published in magazines like Forbes, Inc., Bloom, and Impact. Somehow, beyond all of that, she manages to make time to be a registered nurse and help others optimize their health and lifestyles through her company, Health Redesign. Shawna is an absolute vault of knowledge. So with that, Shawna, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Boo.
So Shawna, over the course of the past 2 decades, I know that you've accumulated a ton of knowledge, whether it's through your studies, through work itself, or through personal health experience. So there's a lot of different ways that we can take this episode in today, a lot of different ways we can take the conversation in. But the topic that I really want to hone into today is sleep, but more specifically, the importance of sleep. But as I as I alluded to, before we get into that, I know you have a very, very compelling health story, a personal story that you'd like to share.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Thank you. So, everyone comes to health from a different example and a different piece of their life. And quite often people get involved in wanting to help others, typically because of something that's happened within their own lives. And that's exactly my story. So grew up as a pretty healthy kid. I had a jaw overbite where I used to be able to stick my thumb in between my upper jaw and my lower jaw with my teeth closed. And then it caused a lot of clicking and locking and popping. And so by the time I was almost 18, I ended up having jaw surgery because my jaw was so causing so many problems that I could hardly even eat solid food at 18. And so had this massive jaw surgery and then ended up getting all kinds of weird things after it. So the first step was having chronic sinus infections. I was on antibiotics on and off for pretty much 6 months straight, and that just cut down my immune system. So then from that, it just led to this cascade of all these weird health issues that people in their young 20s just simply don't have. So Around that time, I had shingles 3 different times, one summer after another. I've had gout. I've had fungal infections, staph infections. My knees were so inflamed, I literally had to walk upstairs sideways. My sleep fell apart. I was depressed. And it was just to the point that I wasn't suicidal, but I was like, if I got hit by a bus that day, I would have been happy. Like I was in so much suffering. I felt so old. And my sleep literally was 2 to 3 hours a night, which we'll talk about a little bit more as we go along into the podcast. But I didn't realize how much it was affecting my mental health. And I thought I was going crazy. I thought I perhaps had bipolar or schizophrenia. And, in those ages is typically when those things start to pop up. And for me, it was this time in my life where I just was miserable. And so I felt like if I feel this bad now, how bad am I going to feel when I'm 60 or 70 or 80? And I had a long life ahead of me and just didn't really want to go there. And so for me, it was all about how do I basically get myself out of that deep hole, and tried a ton of different things. So did a lot of research. At the time, I was in my kinesiology degree and teaching people how to be healthy, and it just wasn't working for me. And so it was about how I uncovered these 7 pillars of health to pull my health back together and ultimately help other people.
So out of curiosity, I'm going to go ahead and make the assumption that while you were going through this crisis, if you will, you weren't doing that alone. You were seeking help, you going to the doctors, and it was inconclusive, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. So I went through tons of different testing. I had gut pain that would take me to the hospital because it was so bad that I swore it was my appendix or my gallbladder rupturing. The pain was just intense. And I'd get to the hospital and they'd say, oh, well, you're constipated. And I'm like, but I'm not. Like, I've gone to the bathroom 4 times today. I know I'm not. And they would just pretty much blew me off. I got sent to specialists. So I saw rheumatologists. They did tons of blood work, and literally nothing was coming back on any of these tests. yet I clearly wasn't well. I wasn't healthy, and I was far from this idea of optimal health. And so, yeah, I tried all different kinds of things. I went to traditional doctors. I went to, Western medicine. I tried acupuncture. I tried homeopathy, naturopathic medicine, and I tried all different kinds of things, lots of different diets, lots of different workout programs. And, on their own, those single things just didn't make a difference. And it was when I really started to look at it as a whole puzzle rather than individual pieces that things started to fall into place.
So where along that journey did you become or decide to become a nurse? I assume there's some correlation there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the stories definitely overlap and intertwine.
Yeah.
Part of it was that I had been in the fitness industry for about 10 years. And I was at the point where I was working these really long days. So I'd be on the pool deck at, 6 a.m. or opening a gym at 4 a.m. And so my hours were all over the map. I'd be working until 10 at night. And because of how it works, you only get paid for small chunks. So in a day, I might get paid for 6 or 8 hours, but then I've put in a 12 to 14 hour day, including all the prep that goes into doing your personal training sessions or teaching a fitness class. And so I thought, well, what's my next step? And feeling a little bit burnt out, looking at, do I do a master's in kinesiology? What's that going to get me? Where do I want to go? And at the time I was doing a lot of presentations, and it kind of kept coming up of like, oh, are you a nurse? I'm like, well, no, but I have like all this training and experience. And then it kind of planted that seed in my head, and really thought about where I want to go and what I want to do and how I want to make an impact in the lives of other people. And nurses have a lot of credibility, and nurses can do so many different things. I think I heard a stat that there's something like 1,000 different jobs that nurses can do, which, I mean, how many other professions can say that? And so it opens up a lot of doors and a lot of different ideas of, I can be a nurse in very many different ways over the course of a career.
Right. So before we jump into the topic of sleep, you said a couple things there, and I think it's the perfect segue into sleep. You said taking control, so putting it into my own hands. You talked about different pillars, 7 pillars. So this is a model that you came up with.
Yeah.
I want to give you the opportunity to talk about that because I know sleep is one of those pillars.
Absolutely. And so a lot of that was uncovered during my own health struggle, but seeing the same kind of things pop up over and over again with the people that I kept working with, whether it be through my kines degree, whether it be through nursing. And, we come across and we have these problems and things pop up and we think, wow, like I'm the only person that's having this, that's struggling with this, that has this challenge. And while we feel very alone in our stories and our struggles, and I mean, my story might be different than your story and whoever else is out there, but at the end of the day, the fundamentals of those stories overlap so much, and they all come down to the same basic things. And so when I was doing research on how do I get better and how do I fix myself, because at the end of the day, I wasn't getting the help that I needed through all of these other very well-educated, talented care providers, is that it isn't one thing. It isn't this quick fix that, you just need to work on your nutrition or just do your exercise or, just focus on mental health. It's this looking at it all together. So I talk about it in a couple different ways. So one is the idea of a tabletop, and our health has 4 fundamental pillars, and that's the bottom, the table legs of our of the table. And so that's sleep, nutrition, exercise, and mental health. And so the digestion is what ties all 4 of those pillars together and interacts with them. And then your medical conditions and lifestyle factors are what sit on top of your table that can kind of tip it one way or the other way. And so if you think of your health and the idea of like, you cut one of those table legs a little bit shorter. So a woman who's just had a baby, her sleep is not going to be ideal. So we've hacked that table leg right off. Now we've got this table that's a little bit more wobbly. And what we can do sometimes is we can kind of rearrange the legs so we can have more like a tripod. So it's going to stick together a little bit better. But then that only lasts for so long, especially if we stop exercising or we stop focusing on stuff that helps to maintain good mental health. And so then you see, well, this postpartum came out of nowhere when it really didn't. It came out of all these pillars being unequal and imbalanced. The other way that I look at health is the idea of a Venn diagram where, that's where all the bubbles kind of attach together. In the center is where the idea of optimal health lives. So if you think of your 7 pillars getting bigger or smaller, depending on what's going on in your lives, if you have lots of little circles, there's not going to be a lot of spot in the middle to create the idea of optimal health. And so what we want to do is we want to make each of those pillars as big as possible so that we can have the best chance of having good health.
So sleep is the foundation of all health.
Yeah.
I know you firmly believe that, and as well you should. So let's get right into the topic of sleep. Why is it so important? I know it seems like a very, very simple, basic question, but the answer is lost on many of us.
Yeah, Yeah. I mean, sleep is probably the most overlooked pillar out of everything. Like, you look at all of the health information that's out there, there is a ton of information and publicity about nutrition and exercise. Like, those are the really big ones. But sleep is this thing that, like, it's not sexy. It doesn't sell in the same way that you can have like this fitness trend or, a new diet supplement, or like we can't just package sleep and be like, hey, here's the new sleep, for only $29.99 or 2 easy installments, you can have the best night's sleep of your life. Like we don't sell sleep the same way that we sell exercise, we sell nutrition. And so because it's this like nebulous idea, it's an idea and it's a concept, it's not something that we can put a price tag on in the same way. And so I think that's why sleep, it has such a hard time for getting the buy-in. And then so many people are so driven and they think that, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead, and that like I can sleep later, like this is fine, I can keep pushing it off. But it doesn't work that way. And sleep is so fundamental to us that if we're not taking care of it, the problem is that the disconnect between what's happening with not enough sleep typically happens weeks or months or years later. We don't see it right away. So there isn't this immediate correlation of like, well, I didn't sleep well this year. And so we did have this disconnect over the impact on our lives.
Right. And that really, one of the questions I was going to ask you, and one of the things that plagues us is we are very, very, we're not very proactive. We don't think about the future. We think about the now, right? So if I go for a couple of days without sleep, I feel the immediate effects in terms of fatigue. You know, of course, that presents a lot of inherent dangers. Like if you're driving when you're fatigued, that's dangerous. But as you were just alluding to there, as you just suggested, there are major, major long-term implications of not getting enough sleep. What are some examples of those long-term implications?
Yeah, so most of us know the short-term stuff. Like that's pretty easy to be like,
right.
Oh, I'm tired, I'm grumpy, I'm irritable. But the long-term stuff is really connected to our chronic diseases. So we're looking at things like high blood pressure. You're not going to get high blood pressure from one night of not sleeping, or even from, in a week, maybe a couple nights of not sleeping. Like you've got you've got a cold or you've got a pain, and so you don't sleep very good. Like you're not just all of a sudden going to have high blood pressure. Those things take time to accumulate. So, blood pressure is a big one. Cholesterol can indirectly be affected because of some of the stress hormones that go through your body. Diabetes is a big one. Obesity is a big one. Cardiovascular disease and stroke. So the risk of having heart attacks goes up the more sleep impaired we are. And so it's these longer term things that, we're going to see that in, 6 months or a year or even a couple years down the road. We're not going to see that right away. And especially when we're young and we're in our 20s, we think, oh, I'm invincible. Like I don't need to sleep. I can get away with it. And, we really like to push our bodies. And you alluded to the idea of like, we're not as proactive
right.
and preventive. Like we don't necessarily have that buy-in for like, well, when I'm 60, I want to be healthy. It's like, well, we're living in the now and we're in our 20s. So we don't even think about what's happening down the road.
Right. And it's funny because I'm probably going to get chastised after this episode because I am known for not sleeping very, very much. But it's not because I don't know. It's because I'm a little bit stubborn. But going to that not knowing, so sleeping enough, it seems to be a little bit subjective, or at the very least, the fact around it seems to be very, very muddy. It depends on who you ask. So, when you're a teenager, it says that you should sleep anywhere from 7 to 9, or when you're an adult, 5 is enough, or 6 to 8. The numbers are everywhere. They tend to range between 5 and 9, maybe even 10. But where is that optimal?
So it does, you're right, it does change over time, which makes it a little bit more complicated. So when we're kids, we understand like, oh, kids need more sleep. Like that's a known fact. And then we kind of hit our teenage years. And an interesting phenomenon happens when we're in our teen years is that we still have sleep requirements, but your circadian rhythm actually shifts. And so you actually tend to sleep later. So you go to bed later and then you need to sleep later in the day. And then when we're adults, that kind of switches back to more a normal circadian rhythm of kind of where most people operate in society. And then when we get older, it tends to shift again. So in our older years, we tend to wake up earlier and then need to go to bed earlier as well. But, generally speaking for adults, we're looking between that 7 to 9 hours of sleep every single night. And what's almost more important than the amount of sleep that you get is that it's consistent. And so that you're, if you're going to get 7 hours of sleep, you're getting 7 hours every night instead of 7 hours one night, 9 hours the next night, 6.5 the next night. We want it to be pretty consistent. And then it's a balance between quality versus quantity. So we'll probably touch on that as we move along.
Of course. So just to back up before we elaborate on that point, can you quickly, in layman's terms, explain what your circadian rhythm or clock are?
Yeah. So there's actually two really important pieces of sleep. So circadian rhythm is one of them. And so think of that as the sun moon phases. So it's the internal clock that happens deep within your body. It's controlled by this little piece of your brain that's really hard to say. I'm probably going to say it wrong. Suprachiasmatic nucleus. Yep. That one.
Perfect. That one.
Can't even say it right. That it's like, I even have it in my book and I can't even pronounce it. But it's this little piece of your brain that basically controls day night. And so what's going to happen, circadian rhythm says, hey, sun is out. It's bright. It's time to get up, time to face the day, get moving. Then what happens is as the day moves along, melatonin gets secreted and your body says, hey, it's nighttime. It's getting dark. And it responds to those light, dark cues to say, now it's getting time to go to sleep. So we live in this part of the world in North America where our seasons change dramatically. So if you're at the equator, that's probably the most optimal spot because you're having the exact same sun exposure, dark exposure. Like it's pretty
Daily,
equal. It's like daylight, nighttime, it doesn't shift. The further away you get from the equator, the more that's going to shift. And so then it kind of messes up our system. So in the summer, we have these really long days, summer, lots of sun, winter, days tend to be shorter. We tend to have more darkness. So it tends to throw that rhythm off a little bit. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to have that consistent, identical clock every single day.
So that sounds very idealistic. I want to ask you a question that is going to hit very close to home. Okay. As a nurse, you may be working shift work.
Yeah.
Couple nights on, couple nights off, working the day. It's all over the place. How do you best deal with that?
Yeah. So, and really, you're absolutely right. So there is the ideal perfect world, which as long as we know that that's there and that's what we're striving for, that's the important piece of it. Life is not perfect. Life is messy and things are going to happen. So, for me, that could be shift work. For you, it could be having kids. It could be all kinds of different things. Like you've got, a family event and like things happen. We travel, we do things that are going to shift that around. So there is times when it's not ideal. So yes, if I work at a night shift or I work an evening shift, like I know in my head, ideally, I'm going to have the exact same wake time, the exact same sleep time. It doesn't always happen. And so the key is to not stress about that, is to do the very best that you can and to accept that things are going to change. So for all of you out there that have little kids that are saying like, but I can't go to bed at the same time because, my little one's going to wake me up in the middle of the night. It happens, and we just accept that, during that phase of your life, that pillar of health is going to be a little bit weaker and a little bit smaller. And perhaps for some, it's literally going to be like chopped off. You're not even going to have that pillar at all. You're just going to be barely getting the bare minimum of sleep. And you know what? You say, okay, I know that. So I'm going to work on my other pillars to balance that out. But we do our very best to try to get sleep as consistent, as regular as we can.
So as somebody with that knowledge, what are some, let's call it actionable tips or pieces of advice you can help that you can give somebody to move towards more of a routine sleep schedule? Somebody who is a business owner, for instance, who may put sleep off, on the wayside. Right? What is an actionable thing that you can give them?
Yeah. So, lots of people, whether you're a business owner or you're an employee, the concept is still the same, is that, try to figure out what kind of a person you are in the first place. So are you more of a morning person or are you more of a night person? And do your very best to try to support whatever type of person you are. So if you're a morning person, you wake up really early, that's probably your most productive time. So scheduling the work that you've got that's, the most important work, do it when you're most fresh and you've got the most energy. If you're a night person, then try to schedule stuff for later in the day. So having that routine where, I personally am a morning person, like I have a really strong drive to wake up at, like 6 o'clock is my wake up time. If I'm sleeping in, maybe 7 o'clock, like I'm never sleeping in till 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, noon.
Right.
Like people are like, oh, I had the best sleep in ever. And like my system is like, like, ding, you're awake. Like, the warning signs are going off, like, get out of bed, get going, like, get moving. But, if you made me go and have evening meetings and, I've got to perform and do all my business stuff till, 10, 11, midnight, when, even 1 o'clock in the morning, I am useless. I try not to ever do any coaching sessions past 3 o'clock because I'm just not at my best. And so it's working with what your natural sleep rhythm is to say, okay, I'm a morning person. I'm going to do, my stuff in the morning. I'm a night person. I'm going to do my stuff at night. Either way, you still need to give yourself a buffer before you go to bed. So your brain is not wired to go and perform and then put your head on the pillow and expect to fall asleep. You need a wind down time. So that's really important for people to take.
So what I'm really hearing is very similar to nutrition, diet, physical activity. There are different philosophies.
Yes.
So find something that works for you, but do it consistently.
Correct.
Right? Your body it's a computer. It needs to know what to expect, where you're going to get your energy from, when you're going to get it. Likewise, when you're going to sleep, when you're going to get that rest. So let's go back to the quantity versus quality. Now, I'm sure there is some science behind this, but my philosophy is if I sleep for 5-6 hours, but I feel like I am sound asleep, I'm getting high quality sleep, that would be more effective or more refreshing than somebody who slept 8 to 9 hours, but they're tossing and turning all night. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah. So absolutely, there's a piece of, what we're trying to do is find our sweet spot. So it's this balance of slowly trying to increase your sleep as much as you can until it starts to fall apart. So that's that quality quantity balance. So think of it this teeter-totter that's constantly shifting back and forth. And so if quality is on one side, quantity is on the other, we're going to try to find that spot where they just equal each other right in the middle. And so for some people, what you're going to do is really slow increments of change. So rather than saying, well, I slept 7.5 hours last night, I did good. So now I'm going to try to sleep 8 hours and then 8.5 and then 9. For a lot of people, that's too big of a jump. And so what's going to happen is you're not going to sleep very well because you're not used to that big change. So that's kind of the same idea as sleeping in for an extra half hour or an hour. So you want to do really small incremental changes. So for some people, it's even as slow as 5 minutes every week. So,
wow.
I'm going to wake up at, let's say, 7 o'clock this week. Next week, I'm going to wake up at 7:05 every day. The next week, I'm going to wake up at 7:10 every day. And so slowly increasing the sleep that way versus trying to go, 5 or 10 minutes every day. That's too quick of a jump for some people, especially if you've had years and years of sleep problems. So we're going to play with that balance to see where is that little sweet spot and where do things start to fall apart. So for me personally, I know that if I try to sleep much past that 8-hour mark, that's kind of my upper end of sleep. I would love to get 8.5 hours sleep, but then I typically start waking up in the middle of the night. And so then I'm awake in the night and then I'm tossing and turning and then my mind starts going. And then it's like, oh, if I go to sleep now, I'm only going to get 6.5 hours sleep. Oh, I'm only going to get 5 hours sleep. I'm only going to get 3 hours sleep. And so then my sleep gets very fragmented. Right. And that was something that I really struggled with, was this fragmented sleep where I would sleep for a small chunk, be up for a chunk, sleep for a little bit more, be up. And so just the tossing, turning. Yeah. So it's this balance of, we want to try to consolidate our sleep so it's all in one chunk instead of multiple pieces through the night.
That's so interesting because for me personally, I feel like I'm firing on all cylinders after 5 or 6 hours. But there are days where, I don't know, circumstances, I sleep in for an extra hour. So say 7 hours. I do not feel good those days. So why do you think that is?
That's a pretty normal response. Yeah. So typically what's happening is you're feeling really good in that 5-6 hour mark because your body's firing on adrenaline. And so it's running off of cortisol, it's running off of adrenaline, and those are things that your body is not supposed to run off of all day. So think of the idea of this fight or flight mode all day long, and your body's like, all right, let's go. And so you're constantly being chased by a lion. And it's almost like we get caught up in the excitement of it, of yes, there's a lion, let's go and get it. And we just jump in and that's kind of how we run our days. And I used to run off of that too. And I was so fired up, I couldn't slow down. For me to sit down and to not do anything for 5 or 10 minutes was pretty much impossible. My mind was always going, I could not sit still. And then it's learning that that's not a normal state, is that our bodies are actually meant to slow down, and we have natural rhythms that go through the day that have higher energy or lower energy as we shift through the day, and realizing there are periods that we have lower energy, and that's very normal. That's not you being tired, that's not you needing a cup of coffee, that's not, the afternoon fatigue where you're like, oh, it's just the afternoon blues. Like, it's a normal cycle that happens. It's nothing to do with something that you've done wrong or that you're not, like, that you need to push through. So it's doing slower activities during that time, and then doing higher energy activities when your energy peaks back up. So in terms of for you, someone like you who's on that lower end where you're like, okay, I'm sleeping this 5 to 6 hours. Like, there's a great book out there called Why We Sleep by Matt Walker. And he has this great line where he says, like, there is no one out there that sleeps less than 7 hours a night that is not impaired in some way or another.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm definitely some form of impaired. This is very habitual for me. It's been the case for a decade. But that being said, I know it's going to catch up to me at some point. I'm cautioned about it all the time. One of the things that when we talk about those cautions is, we all know as people of fitness, people who exercise, one of the things that's always said is you need to sleep because you recover in your sleep. Mm-hmm. What is actually happening when you're sleeping?
Truthfully, there's a lot of stuff that happens in our sleep that we actually don't even know and don't even understand. What we do know is that you're absolutely right. Like, that's when we clear out stuff in our brain. So chemicals, neurochemicals build up in your brain during the day. And then at nighttime, what happens is, think of it just like, a cleaning cycle, is that stuff comes through, it washes all that stuff out so it can be fresh for the next day. We consolidate memories from the day. That's where we process our learning. Your tissues repair, your immune system repairs itself. And again, there's normal hormonal cycles that certain hormones and things within the body are supposed to be higher during the day. Some are higher at night. And so it allows that normal process of things to go up and to go down as they're supposed to when we're sleeping. And if you're maybe just resting at nighttime, it doesn't give you that same level of repair that it does when you're actually sleeping.
That's a lot for me to personally digest, of course, given that I sleep so little. And I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that when I sleep so little, I also affect the person next to me. So if I'm waking up in 5 or 6 hours, it's hard. She's a light sleeper as well. So when I wake up, chances are she wakes up, or if at the very least she pretends to not wake up. I know she is, though.
If you stay
so
really still and you don't move, then you won't know I'm awake.
No, exactly. So I do feel bad, and it's definitely something for me to personally consider.
Yeah, and truthfully, the problem with sleep impairment is that our body is so good at compensating for being sleep impaired that we can't actually perceive that we're sleep impaired. And so think of it like constantly having a glass of wine in your system, or a shot of whiskey in your system. Is like, if you always have that in your system, eventually that's going to become your norm. And then you're like, oh, I'm doing good, now I can have 2 a day. Okay, now I can have 3 a day. And we get used to this level, and when we think about it that way, and you're like, oh, it's like having a couple beers on board every single day, then you're like, maybe that's not such a good idea. But we just don't even have the sense that that's even happening.
Right. So how do you start to take control? How do you best put yourself in an environment that is conducive to good quality sleep?
Yeah, so everyone's situation is going to be different in this. So it's hard to give kind of that blanket example, but the best thing is to start chipping away at it. So instead of saying, I'm going to change my sleep, I'm going to go from, sleeping 4.5 hours a night, I'm now going to sleep 8 hours a night. Changing sleep is a slow process. So out of any lifestyle habit, it's probably the slowest and the hardest one to change. So having this level of understanding and acceptance that it's probably going to take you a long time to make those changes.
So just to clarify, what about environmental conditions?
Yeah. So,
I
was getting there.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of how do we change this is change the small pieces that you can. So it's kind of chipping away at some of the environmental pieces while we chip away at the behavioral pieces and the subconscious stuff that's going on inside the mind. So typically what I say is to start chipping away at some simple things that you can do. So trying to sleep in the same spot every night. So if you're couch surfing, you're somewhere, one night and then somewhere different the next night, that makes it really difficult for you to get consistent sleep. So finding a safe place that you can sleep every night, having the same type of routine before bed is really important, but making sure the environment that that you're in, trying to do the things related to, we call it sleep hygiene, but the idea of sleeping, having kind of this routine every night is make your bedroom as dark as possible. Like that is such a big environmental tool. And, so if you're staying in hotel rooms, I've heard of people that literally bring a tape of electrical tape or a roll of electrical tape with them, and they'll put it on like the light on the ceiling where the smoke detector is, and on the light on the TV, and like tape, below the door. And like the darker you can make that space, the better and the deeper your sleep is. And like there's even studies out there with little laser lights, like they'll shine a laser light on your arm or your leg, and that little dot of light interferes with sleep. So if you think that, that little crack in your room isn't really making a big deal, it absolutely is. As soon as that's touching your skin, it's making an impact on your sleep. So if you can sleep in a dark cave, that's kind of the number one for sleep. And then keeping your room pretty much as simple and as clean as you can. So like think minimalistic lifestyle, like, getting rid of all the extra stuff. And I've worked with people that literally they're like, well, I can't sleep in my bed. I'm like, well, why can't you sleep in your bed? Well, because there's too much stuff on my bed. And like it will be covered with magazines and books and clothes and pets. And like there's 2 dogs and a cat and a hamster and a bird. And like they're all sleeping in the same bed. And like you need a space that's your own. So I am an animal lover. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like don't have animals, but they should not be sleeping in your bed with you. Is like, especially if they're interrupting sleep, they should be on the floor beside you, in a safe place. That bed should be for you and your partner, whoever that is.
What about screen time before bed? Myth or fact?
Fact. That is definitely a fact. There is a huge connection between light exposure and its impact on sleep. So we talked a little bit about the idea of melatonin is like, that's what's telling your body go to sleep. So when we're exposed to light, that can be your cell phone, it can be your computer, your TV, it can be the lights in your house. If you've got all the lights turned up really bright, reducing that light as much as possible before you go to bed. And really, we're looking 60 to 90 minutes before bedtime. So the other thing to include in that are like your Kobo Kindle, your e-readers. Even those are going to have an impact on your sleep.
Even with the blue light setting?
Even with the blue light setting, there is still an impact on your sleep. And so if you think, well, I've got the blue light setting on my phone or I've got it on my reading device, it's still going to have an impact on you. Perhaps a little bit less with the blue lighting on there, but having blue blocker glasses like the old granny style ones with like the sides, and they are not very attractive at all. They do make a difference, but trying to just get away from those things, like read a physical real book or do something that slows your mind down before bed. But that light exposure before bed, it will impact your sleep for sure.
What about the temperature? I've heard that being in a cold, cool environment definitely helps with sleep as well. Is that true?
So cooler rooms are easier to sleep in than warmer rooms. Now, someone like me, I am literally the ice princess. I am cold all the time. So I don't love going to sleep in a room that's cold. And we're not saying go sleep in an ice castle, but a couple degrees cooler makes a significant difference in terms of the temperatures your body needs to get to hit the different sleep waves. So you can be snuggled under the covers, but if the air that you're breathing in is a little bit cooler, so if you can crack the window a little bit or close the vent so that the temperature in the room stays a little bit cooler, that makes a huge difference.
So I want to ask you about a phenomenon that a lot of people suffer, where they push themselves through the day and they're absolutely exhausted, and they're fully expecting that by the time they hit their pillow, they're out like a light and they're going to fall asleep. But the opposite happens. They cannot get to sleep.
Yeah, so that's called tired but wired. That is where you are so exhausted, you can rarely keep your eyes open, and you're ready to go to sleep. You do your routine, you're like barely conscious, you lay down, and then it's like ding, and this alarm clock goes off in your head and you are unable to sleep. Like then the brain starts going and you just like, you feel like you cannot turn it off. That happens all the time. And so part of that is related to hormones, and part of that is related to having a lack of routine before going to bed. And so it's working on shifting that sleep routine so that you always do the exact same thing before bed. So if it's like, I wash my face, I brush my teeth, I read for 20 minutes and then go to bed, you do that every single night in that same order, because what that's doing is on this really, really deep level. So back of your brain, it's telling your body, hey, when these things happen in this order, the next thing that happens is we go to sleep. And so then we're giving ourselves these cues and these clues that are reminders to your brain and your body to be like, Oh, wait, I've recognized this before. I see this. Now I know that sleep is coming. So by giving ourselves that repeatable pattern to say, hey, this is what's going to happen next, then our system can get used to that routine. And then what happens is over time, then we can reduce the impact of that tired but wired syndrome and doing things that are going to help support your hormones. So like not drinking a ton of coffee during the day. So like cut off your caffeine at noon so that your body can naturally hit those rhythms to be like, oh, the caffeine is wearing off, and now this is when we get ready to start slowing down, and to not have foods that are going to be stimulants before bedtime,
Right.
or caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, those kind of things are going to interfere with your sleep.
Since you mentioned coffee, I am sure it affects everybody differently. What is an optimal cutoff time for stimulants like coffee?
Yeah, so coffee has a really long half-life, and I can't remember the exact time, but I feel like it's 12 hours.
Okay.
So half-life is basically meaning that if I have, let's say, 30 milligrams of caffeine in 12 hours, I'm going to have half of that left in my system. So I'm still going to have 15 milligrams of caffeine in my system. And so because it takes so long to metabolize it, it sits around for a long time. So if you're the kind of person who says, I can drink a cup of coffee after dinner and I can still go to sleep, I'm not denying that. There are some people that metabolize and process caffeine quicker. So 50% of the population can metabolize, 50% can't. So they have a harder time processing it. I'm definitely in the side that can't. My cutoff, if I want to have a good night's sleep, literally is noon. Someone who can metabolize it could probably get closer to 3 o'clock, something like that. But what's happening is it may not affect your ability to fall asleep or to stay asleep, but it is having an impact on your sleep architecture. So the rhythms of, we've heard of REM sleep, non-REM sleep, the different stages. It's going to impact what that pattern, that architecture looks like, even though you may actually stay asleep, is that you're not hitting the same deep levels at the right times.
I've never felt like I was guilty of so many things.
You're doing it all wrong.
Yeah, this sounds terrible, especially given what you just said, but I'm comfortable having a small cup of coffee at 8 o'clock at night, and I'll be just fine.
Switch to decaf.
Switch to decaf. I love to drink coffee. Not because I feel like I need it, but I love the taste. I drink black coffee. It is my happy place, but it's something that I'll keep in mind. Now, you mentioned REM versus non-REM sleep. Can we go into just a small, quick detail there? Or sorry, elaboration of what those are?
Yeah, so it has to do more with the depths and the levels of your brain. And this is an area of sleep that I am definitely not as strong in. So it's so it is important that we hit different levels of sleep. So it's where we dream, it's where we recover. And so within the different levels of sleep, we're hitting different pieces of that recovery process. And so what's important is that we do go through the different levels. And so we hit a typical sleep cycle is going to move through in about 90 minutes. And what's going to happen is we're going to repeat that over through the night as we continue to move through cycles. But the first 90-minute cycle is going to look different than your last 90-minute cycle. And so what we're trying to do is to allow your brain to process so that it has different levels of REM sleep and non-REM sleep so that we're hitting all the different parts of that recovery process through the night.
So that's why it's all the more important to be getting the 8 hours, so to speak, so you have more cycles.
Correct.
Than if you were to have 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Man, I'm in trouble. So I want to go back to the sleep conditions again. Let's assume you're not in routine and you're just having an off day. You get to bed, it's 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and you're feeling wired. I know there are different trains of thought. Do I just lay here and until I fall asleep, or do you get out and do something else? And same question for when you happen to wake up in the middle of the night and you can't fall back asleep.
Yeah. So yes, there's kind of the idea, perfect world, we're going to sleep for our 8 hours, all is good. But what happens is, you're right, we sometimes go to bed, we lay in bed, we toss, we turn, we toss, we turn, we can't fall asleep, or we fall asleep really easily. And then throughout the night, we wake up at some point and then we can't get back to sleep. So in both of those situations, ideally, we don't want to stay in bed for any more than 20 minutes. So we're really looking at patterning. So it's this conditioning that we associate our bed with sleep. And so we've probably heard this analogy that bed is for sleep and for sex only, nothing else happens in your bed. So you are not working on your computer on your bed. You are not, I don't know, people do all kinds of crazy things in their bed, but YouTube, like you're not, you're literally sleeping there and you're having sex there, and that is all. And so then you create this association that when I'm in my bed, it's one of these two things, and well, nothing's happening right now, so it must be sleep time. So then you have this really strong association. If we lay in bed and we're restless, what happens is we get all these subconscious thoughts. And, I've worked with clients that are like, I don't have any bad thoughts about my bed. I'm like, but you do. Like it's literally in this deep center of our brain that may not even be conscious, because then it creates this idea that when I'm in bed, I toss and I turn. And so yes, for that type of patterning, and this was something that I really had a strong disconnect with, is that every time I'd be in bed, I'd be tossing, turning, and these negative thoughts of, well, I can't sleep, and when am I going to sleep? And if I fall asleep now, like your brain kind of runs away with itself. Is you have to get out of bed. Is that then you literally remove yourself from the situation, go do a calming activity. So whether it be maybe it's coloring, maybe it's drawing, maybe it's reading a book with a dim light, maybe it's stretching, listening to some quiet music, going back to bed and trying it again. So if you've had that pattern where you can't fall asleep or you wake up frequently, it's going to take some time to repattern that one. That one is a slow one to change. But being consistent with the pattern of I'm awake, I'm not falling back asleep, remove yourself from it, that will help to create a healthy association again.
So is it fair to assume that you don't have a TV in your bedroom?
It is fair to assume I do not. And my cell phone is not right beside my head either. Intentionally, it's as far away as I can get it in my room.
Guilty again.
I'm finding all your sweet spots here.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm not perfect.
None of us are.
I sleep with my phone right next to me, sometimes under me, so that when the alarm goes off in the morning, I don't wake up my girlfriend. So it's just habit. One of the things I always hear, whether it's teenagers or adults, is I'm going to catch up on the weekend. I'm going to catch up on my sleep on the weekend. Does that actually work?
No. So I love this question, because this ties into the second piece of sleep that's super important. So we talked about circadian rhythms, sun, light, dark rhythms.
Right.
The other piece is called sleep drive. So it's the idea of basically you wake up in the morning, and that's when you're most refreshed, you've got the most energy. So energy peaks up, and then as the day goes along, it starts to come down. But what's happening is the drive, the distance between when you were last asleep is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so there's getting this really strong gap. So think of when you're exhausted, like you're so tired, this drive is really high, and it puts it's also called sleep pressure, because it puts a ton of pressure on you to literally go back to sleep. So that's when a ton of adenosine builds up in the brain, and it's giving you the signal of like, hey, it's time to go to sleep. So when these two systems work together, then sleep performs really well. But then this idea of I'm going to catch up on sleep on the weekends and make it all better. So what we're doing then is we're mucking up both of these systems. Is we're changing time zones, essentially, is what we're doing. So we're saying, well, tonight I'm going to sleep on Calgary time. Tomorrow night I'm going to sleep on Vancouver time. The next night I'm going to sleep on Toronto time. And so every time we're changing our wake time and our sleep time, we're literally flying across the country and going to bed at different times. So if you can imagine, like you've been in Vancouver all weekend, and then you come back to Calgary time and you try to get up in the morning, you're going to be tired in the morning because you're on a different time zone. And so then all of a sudden we're thinking, well, that makes a ton of sense. But we don't understand why when we stay up late Friday night, sleep in on Saturday, stay up late Saturday night, sleep in Sunday, why Monday morning, all of a sudden we can't wake up. We feel so groggy.
Right.
It takes us almost the whole week to get over that. And then we do it all again.
Yeah.
And so it's this system that keeps repeating itself. And yes, there's times where our bodies need more sleep. So you're sick, you need more sleep. Like
Right.
you need to recover.
Right.
Or you had a really bad night's sleep where you weren't sleeping very much. Then intentionally planning a short nap or sleeping a little bit more, but not excessively more. So we're not looking to mess up your sleep rhythm for the next day. So I can maybe sleep an extra hour, but I'm not sleeping an extra 5 hours in the morning and then wondering why I can't get to sleep that night.
Going back to your quality of sleep, I'm going to ask you a very subjective question. How does one know that they've had a good night's rest?
Ooh, that is a good one because it is subjective. Is there's a level of, this perception of, well, how do I feel? And sometimes you can feel really crummy and have had a good night's sleep. And sometimes you can feel really good and have had like a technically bad sleep.
Right.
And so the best way to measure it is actually by keeping a sleep log that's detailed with a whole bunch of different measurements. So really what we're looking at is, what time did you go to sleep? What time did you wake up? Did you wake up through the night? And then coming up with a measure of what your sleep quality is that's very objective. And then you can lay your subjective stuff on top of it. And so I know, like, when I was working on recovering my sleep, at my worst, 2 to 3 hours a night total, not even all at one time. And so when I was getting better, and it was typically more around that 5 and 6 hour mark where I was starting to feel a little bit better, but I would still feel so exhausted. And, I would be sleeping better because I would have slept for almost 6 hours continuous. Right. Compared to 2 to 3 hours, which is so much better. But I was like, I almost felt more sluggish and like just yuckier than I did when I only slept 2 to 3 hours a night. And part of that is because what happens is the stuff like adrenaline and cortisol that I was running off of doesn't need to work as hard anymore. And so now I don't have this huge adrenaline rush first thing in the morning to get me going. And I'm like, I need coffee, I need sugar, I need carbohydrates. Like I need things to get me going, to boost me up. And so that subjective piece can be quite difficult. What we want to do is to layer it together with the objective piece to look at like, okay, well, how do I really feel, but what's actually going on? And then looking at the bigger picture of, am I moving in the right direction or am I moving in the wrong direction?
So self-awareness is a big component of that.
Yes.
I knew that was a tough question. You have mentioned a couple times now melatonin. So I just wanted to quickly get your thoughts on supplementation. It's widely available. It's very, very cheap. Some come 3 milligrams, some come 5, and some come 10. Do you recommend it at all?
I do, but the thing with melatonin is that it is not indicated for insomnia, which is why most people take it. So most people take it because they, have trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, and that's actually not what it's for. Melatonin is for shifting us onto the correct time zone. So we talked about that, the weekend shift where I sleep in later and then I come back. Melatonin is going to help you get back onto the same time frame, and then it helps keep you there. But what is really interesting about melatonin and really any product that's out there is there's this really powerful placebo effect that we believe that if I'm going to take this, it's going to help me. And so even if I'm taking a sugar pill that has nothing in it, it's actually not doing anything for my sleep, but I believe that this thing is going to help my sleep. It will, because I've got this placebo effect. And so a lot of times melatonin works for people when they say, no, like this works for me, is because that placebo effect is so strong that it's giving them the advantage to say, yes, I'm doing something that's going to help me sleep better, but that's not actually what melatonin is for.
I'm going to assume that you advocate to take it intermittently as you need it. I'm sure there are people out there who depend on it, so to speak. So does prolonged supplementation suppress the body's ability to create its own?
So if you're taking it in your lower doses, so you're taking it in that 1 to maybe 3 milligrams, it doesn't have a ton of effects. If you're starting to take it in those higher amounts, like 10 milligrams, then it can decrease the amount of melatonin that you are naturally producing. And so ideally, you're right, is you don't want to use this as an every night thing. However, if this is something that's helping you to get to sleep, to stay asleep, and then slowly wean yourself off of it and then go every other night and then every third night and kind of space it out so that you eventually pull it out of your system and you only pull it out every once in a while, that's what it's there for. But really melatonin is meant for, I'm going to fly to Europe and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to change the time zones and taking it to support that. But yes, I'm a huge advocate to say, let's try to get you off of as much stuff as possible, whether it be sleeping pills, whether it be other, natural sleep aids, whether it be melatonin, is that ultimately a lot of those things are just patching your sleep. They're not fixing your sleep.
Correct.
So in the same way that, I could say, well, I don't have any I don't know, iron in my diet, so I'm just going to take an iron pill. We haven't really fixed my diet.
Yeah.
So I'm just patching it with something instead of saying, okay, well, maybe I go out and I look for iron-rich foods, or I look for other ways that I can get iron into my diet instead of taking this supplement. That's what we're doing with these sleep pills, is we're just patching it.
Right. So there's a lot of other cures you would recommend before melatonin, going
Yeah.
back to the sleep hygiene, the sleep conditions, routine, a lot of that.
Absolutely.
So one final thing here I have to ask. It is often said that exercise, physical activity, contributes to good sleep. Where do you stand on that? And if it's true, if you agree with that, why is that the case?
Yeah, so sleep before bedtime is typically not recommended, because what's going to happen is we're going to release all these endorphins.
Sorry, exercise before bedtime.
Sorry, did I say sleep before
you said
bedtime?
sleep before bedtime. Yeah.
Clearly, I need more sleep. Exercise before bedtime can release endorphins, and so then it makes it harder to fall asleep. Exercise earlier, so whether it be, early evening, whether it be in the morning, absolutely. Because a lot of times what we're doing is that we're just burning off energy so that we're more tired and ready to go to sleep. From the research I did, there isn't, from what I understand, a specific connection of saying like exercise makes you sleep better, but exercise burns your energy and tires you out so that you do sleep. And so there's a connection and a correlation, and there's a strong correlation. People who exercise typically sleep better than people who don't exercise. So I'm a huge advocate for it. And what that exercise looks like to you might look different than maybe what it does for me. But I think it's a really important piece of, you've got sleep problems. That's always a question I ask. Are you exercising?
That's great, Shawna. Honestly, like I said at the beginning, you are truly a vault of information. Not only because you've studied it, but you've lived it, you've developed programs around it. Today, you help others through their poor sleep patterns and other poor behavioral patterns. So I want to give you an opportunity to talk about that. Can you tell us a little bit more about Health Redesigned and, of course, Healthy by Choice?
Yeah. So, it started with this passion project of mine is I've always wanted to write a book. So wrote a book, Healthy by Choice, Your Blueprint for Vital Living. And it's basically about, like what we talked about today, those 7 core pillars of health. And it's essentially a blueprint. So it talks about what are the fundamental pieces of each of those, of sleep, nutrition, exercise, and what those look like and how you potentially can change them in your life. So it's not prescriptive in terms of me saying like, you have to do this, this is the only answer. But what it is a combination of all the research I've done to say, these are the core essentials for sleep, for nutrition, for exercise. And then you can choose to apply them to your life as best as you can, because all of our situations are different. But those are the fundamental pillars of health. So what I've done is I've taken that same concept and basically created the workbook to it in an online course format. So it's an online course with a workbook that you get to go through in depth to really work through each of those pieces to enhance and to improve the quality of your life. So Health Redesigned is all about taking that information, making it applicable for you, and then getting out there. I do a lot of public speaking. I do corporate wellness programs, one-on-one personalized coaching. So I do all kinds of things all related to health.
That's spectacular. Do you know how many passion projects become Amazon bestsellers? I can't imagine too many. So with Health Redesigned in the works, your corporate wellness, your speaking engagements, your writing for magazines, you have a lot on the go. What's next for you?
Ooh, what's next? That's a great question. It's always something that I struggle with, is like, when is enough? And, I'm very much a goal driven person. And so, when I do one thing, it's like, what's the next thing? And so definitely rattling through some ideas in my head of what that next book might be, but really just waiting for that to be inspired. So a book may be on the horizon, but, just waiting for the right time for that to come through. And for me, really just looking to grow my program.
Excellent. It might be another book. It might be another giant trail. You're quite fond of those.
Hiking trail.
Yeah. Jeez. Well, good for you. So I want to ask you, given all of this, given your own personal evolution, if a person were to be living an evolved life, what does that look like?
Yeah, I love this question that you ask everybody. And for me, it has to tie into health and fitness and wellness. Is that's just such a big piece of my life, and I'm so passionate about sharing that with other people. So for me, an evolved life would be at a point where everyone is proactive and preventive with their life and is really looking out for their own best interests and taking their own health, taking responsibility for that. Is there's so much that we can do to help ourselves, and a lot of times I see people that just depend on someone else to fix them. And my message is that you're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. You're already whole. And that evolved life looks like empowering yourself and feeling like you really can control all of those things, because you actually can.
That message really, really hits close to home. Being proactive, being preventative. You have the capability to take it into your own hands. Sleep being one of those pillars, one of those things you can do. And the thing about sleep is it's also free.
Yeah.
Beyond all else, sleep is free. We're just not taking advantage of it. Shawna, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd recommend that you subscribe to our channel at Evolution VN, and you can do so below. Each week, we'll be releasing a new information-packed interview which will simplify your health and fitness and help you maximize your life. So, subscribe below to be notified whenever a new video is released. Until then, live an evolved life.